You are listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 with Belinda Francis. Norman Richmond, Lisa Watson is on the buttons, and we just heard from Archie Shep down in Brazil, and it was the vocalist on that particular track was Bill Whittingham, and Archie Shep, like I said, was one of my mentors, and we're getting ready to talk to Professor Rupert Lewis, and Rupert Lewis is the author of many books. He's edited some 6 books, and one of the books that he did. I think he's done two books on Walter Rodney, but one of my favorite books is Walter Rodney's Intellectual and Political Thought, and Rupert Lewis is one of the foremost Garvey scholars as well, and he is based in, I guess, Mona. You're still in Mona Heights, of course.
Hello.
I say you're still in Mona Heights.
Yes,
I'm
still very much so.
All right. So how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing very well, thank you, and I hope you are too.
Yeah, everything is well, and I guess people know that you and I know one another. We have some very close ties. I think, I know some of my family lives near you, and we've been.
Yes.
My son is.
I pass that home every day.
Okay.
Just around the corner.
Yes, sir. But we are wanted to. This is the 45th anniversary of the assassination of Walter Anthony Rodney, and you are known as one of the foremost. Yourself and Tony Martin are a really Garvey scholars, and you've done, I guess, probably the definitive book on Dr. Walter Anthony Rodney. Can we talk about Dr. Walter Rodney?
Yes, certainly. Well, I want to take your listeners back to Walter Rodney's life. Born in 1942, died in 1980, killed, assassinated, 13th June 1980, but lived a very fruitful life. One of the first in his family to be educated at university level, did very well at high school, Queen's College in Georgetown, Guyana, where he attended and excelled. Came to the then University College of the West Indies, which was at that time a college of the University of London, under Sir Arthur Lewis in 1962. This University College of the West Indies became the University of the West Indies. And Walter Rodney did his history degree here from 1960 to 1963. He then went to the School of Oriental and African Studies of the University of London and completed his PhD at 24 years old. He then went and taught at University of Dar es Salaam, where he did pioneering work, including his big important book on how Europe undeveloped Africa. Because at the time, that book was inspired by the Tanzanian students and African students he was teaching. And the question is, why had Africa not been on the same level as Europe? Because Africa had been at the same level of Europe economically up to the beginning of the 16th century. And Walter attempted, through his analysis, the study of the transatlantic chattel slavery, colonialism, to explain the structures economically, militarily, and politically, as well as culturally, that had held the African continent back. which included, of course, the 20 million or so African youth, larger young people, children who were taken from the continent during the transatlantic chattel slavery. So he was explaining the development process that Africa faced at independence during the government of Julius Nyerere, who was himself an outstanding anti-colonial fighter, but in addition to that, someone who sought to develop the policies that were appropriate for the advancement of Tanzania and African countries in the world of the 1960s. This was, of course, a period of very sharp liberation struggles in the Congo with the murder of Patrice Lumumba, in Southern Africa with the liberation.
Did we lose people?
Look like
Yeah.
I think we did.
Yeah. Okay. So why don't we continue on with the track, and then we could
Get him back.
get him back. Yeah.
Down in Brazil, where people thrill by ballet skill and festival, the carnival, join many there. They dance and sing the machichi. The legend goes up and wild, or should I say, black Orphea, the essence of all purity. Down in Brazil, down by the sand and sea, down in Brazil, where I'd long to be. The carnival, join so many there, they dance and sing.
You are listening to Gaia Spoken Music on Black Power 96, and we lost Mr. Lewis, but we have him back. And you were talking about Umwalimu Julius Nyerere.
Yes, well, a pioneer in the development of independent Tanzania, but also considerable support to all the liberation movements of Southern Africa, where Dar es Salaam was the base for Frelimo, Mozambique, MPLA, Angola, and the African National Congress, South Africa. But let me move forward to 1968, when Walter Rodney came to Jamaica. Jamaica was then 6 years into independence, but still very much a colonial type country, certainly culturally, with the way in which Black people were treated by a Black leadership, because the relics of British colonial mentality was still very much embedded in the minds of the political leadership, although the prime minister was Black. So African history was anathema. They didn't feel that that was relevant to Jamaica. So Rodney's teaching, particularly his work among urban youth and Rastafari, created a consciousness that the government felt threatened by. Hence, they banned all the literature of Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad, all literature, even all literature that came out of the U.S., and of course the internally generated ideas of Walter Rodney. And he was refused re-entry in Jamaica after attending a conference Black Power Conference in Montreal, Canada. Walter went on later to return to Tanzania and to teach, but he went to Guyana in 1974, his homeland, and he was refused a teaching job at the University of Guyana. And between 74 and 1980, he was one of the founders of the Working People's Alliance, which was an organization that brought together Africans and Indians into one organization and developed a program of transformation. He was subsequently assassinated by the government of Forbes Burnham. I attended his funeral in Ghana in June 1980, and it is still one of the largest funeral processions that has taken place, with over 20,000 people. And people not only from Guyana, but from all over the world. In 2025, Dr. Pat Rodney, the widow of Dr. Walter Rodney, has requested that the Guyanese government pay reparation for injury to the family caused by the bomb, because a couple of years ago, the Ghanaian government had a tribunal which established that the state under Forbes Burnham was responsible for that assassination. So she's calling for reparation to be paid to the family, including the brother Donald Rodney, who was also in the car and was injured, and who the government accused of blowing up his brother. But the Working People's Alliance in 2025 also made a request that the University of Guyana be renamed in honor of Walter Rodney. Now, there are some reasons which I think listeners should understand why this demand is so important. First of all, there's Walter Rodney's scholarship is globally recognized as being pioneering. But in addition to that, Walter Rodney, especially in the years 1974 to 1980, worked to implement alternative forms of mobilization of working people, inclusive of Africans and Indians. Walter Rodney was opposed to political mobilization based on ethnicity in a small society. And that still characterizes Guyanese and Trinidad politics, where the population is divided between people of African and people of Indian descent. So his politics is very, very important, especially now that Guyana is an oil state. And although the multinationals, Exxon and others, are the ones who make the biggest amount of money, the Guyanese state is coming in for a lot of money as a result of the offshore oil exploration. In addition,
Rupert, I'm sorry, but could I ask you a question now? I don't want to cut you, but could you talk about, this is in line with what you're saying now, Walter Rodney and Kwame Ture, at that time, Stokely Carmichael, had some differences on the question of the unity of Africans and Indians. Could you briefly talk about that and then continue?
Yes, well, that's a good intervention, good question. I think Stokely did not understand the Guyanese situation, and he felt that Walter should be referring to African black people. Walter took the position based on his knowledge of Guyanese society and his historical research, was that there were two sets of people in the labor force in Guyana: Africans that were enslaved and indentured Indian laborers brought from India. And these two groups constituted a black working class. The Indians themselves were treated in the same way in the post-emancipation period as were the blacks on the sugar estates. Walter therefore felt that one of the tactics in the period of independence was the separation and the ethnic mobilization of Africans and Indians as separate groups. He pointed out in the historical process, Africans had their organizational groupings, Indians had their organizational groupings, and they had forged in the People's Progressive Party, led by Cheddar J. Gunn, in the late 1940s and early 1950s, a single political party that won the Legislative Council elections in 1953. And the British intervened in 1953 militarily to remove the Cheddar J. Gunn government that had brought the two groups together. And after that, the British and later the Americans supported the ethnic mobilization so that you would not have a united front against colonialism and imperialism. So there was a difference between how you use black that Stokely had, that was influenced by his American experience, and the way Walter Rodney used black that was shaped by his knowledge of the Caribbean. So that's an important point to deal with the 2025 situation, where governance by one ethnic group continues in Guyana today, and the other ethnic group, Africans, are on the receiving end of decisions in which they are not participants. And when you have a lot of money coming into the state, as it's going to flow into Guyana, Guyana has the land size of the United Kingdom with a population of under 1 million. The UK's population is over 60 million. Guyana's population is over 1 million. Guyana is responsible now for the food security of the Caribbean. Guyana has tremendous hydropower. Guyana has resources in alumina, and in gold. You're therefore dealing with a state which many people have argued will in the coming years be wealthier than the Emirates. Now, when you have that amount of money and you have one ethnic group being dominant in the state as against the other, Walter Rodney's teachings and his analysis comes into play in terms of figuring out a different future for Guyana in which you have a more inclusive system of politics. So let me leave Guyana there, but I think I should make the point that with respect to Walter Rodney, 45 years have gone, 2 generations have emerged, and Walter Rodney is far less known in Guyana among this generation in the Caribbean than ever before. And so there is a big gap in the consciousness. His legacy, therefore, has been threatened by the way in which we silence the voices of our outstanding ancestors. And I would say that Walter's voice is no longer a major force in Guyana, and certainly not in the rest of the Caribbean in the way it was during his life.
That's really criminal, isn't it?
It is criminal, but it can be corrected through the work, and certainly renaming the university in his honor would stimulate knowledge and be a basis on which one can hang information on. And I think that that call needs to be supported internationally.
How do you think that could be done?
Well, certainly at the upcoming conference of the African Union in Addis Ababa is one of the points that can be made. Groups in the Caribbean need to give support to that as well, and put some pressure on the Ghanese government to seriously consider that, because certainly in terms of scholarship and in terms of his contribution to ideas of governance in a ethnically divided society, Walter's work in history and in politics speaks to that pressing issue that still is a problem in Ghana today.
Listening to diasporic music on Black Power 96 with Melinda Francis, Norman Richmond, and Lisa Watson. Buttons, I think, Melinda, you have some questions, right?
Yeah, I was just wondering, what is the prep leading up to the meeting being done, like the work leading up to that meeting in September?
Well, let me put it this way. There are two things that are important on the meeting coming up in Addis Ababa. I think that the theme Justice for Africans and People of African Descent through Reparations. I think the AU in adopting a reparation agenda. I don't know what their preparation has been, but there are sufficient historians in Africa who have been doing original work on this area. Just last week, Thursday, I attended a lecture by two Africans, one from Guinea-Bissau, Dr. Jose Nafafe, historian, and Dr. Habibi from Burkina Faso, who is a professor in international law. Both reside outside of the continent. One is at University of Bristol, the historian. The other is at University of Leiden. And they took us back to an important part of that transatlantic trade, which is the Angola, Portugal, Brazil relationship of the 17th century. And the case of 1684, the court case for the abolition of slavery before the Vatican. The importance of this was made by Ndongo, Prince Lorenzo da Silva Mendonça, who was from Angola. And they documented both the case and the case law in the Vatican. The importance of this talk is that, and the book that was written by Professor Nafafe, is that African abolitionism preceded British abolitionism. And international law at the time, on the 18th century, justified the slave trade, justified the case against slavery. So in terms of the international law precedent and the role of Africans, what the historians are providing for us, African historians, is a very important platform on which to launch a global campaign. The second part of the preparation that I think is important for this meeting is that the Africa Import Export Bank has made a grant to the PJ Patterson Institute for African Caribbean Advocacy to develop a AI hub that would link parts of West Africa, East Africa, and the Caribbean. And that is going to be discussed at a meeting in Nigeria in this month. The point I'm making here is that one has to combine the historic requirement for reparation with practical economic measures, particularly measures that harness technology. And this is being done as we speak. It can't be the history reparation alone. It has to be a combination of that and economic initiatives on the African continent. And that work is being done, and I hope it will be reflected in the AU reparation meeting.
You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 with Melinda Francis, and we're on with Professor Rupert Lewis, the Garvey expert, and who knew Walter Rodney personally and has written several books on Walter Rodney. There were some recent books. Walter had some books that have come out recently, right?
Yes, the two books, Decolonial Marxism, Essays from the Pan-African Revolution, with a foreword by the late great Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Africa's best writer, along with Chinua Achebe and Wole Soyinka and others. And that book came out recently. He also, his lectures on the Russian Revolution were also published by Verso Press. And a new book, a new edition of The Groundings with My Brothers. And I know that Dr. Patricia Rodney is also working on another book, which will publish some of his other historical research. So this young man, Walter, at 38 years, was a prolific historian as well as a activist in the 60s and 70s of great renown and considerable impact. And I'm glad we are discussing and remembering his legacy. And one of the things which I am so happy with, and maybe another program we can discuss it, are the young women scholars who have been unearthing the remarkable work of women in the Garvey movement. That's discussion for another period. Really important young female scholars, Natanya Duncan, and I'm reading a PhD thesis from York University in Canada by another young scholar. And this is, for me, really dynamite and exploring areas of the Garvey movement that we don't know about and bringing that to the fore. Natanya Duncan's book is a classic of women and the making of the UNIA. Really important work. So just want to put that in at some other point when you can have Natanya Duncan in and other women scholars who have really been carrying forward the work in ways that would have made my mentor, Amy Jakes Garvey, proud.
Let me say this, and then we have to close. But
yes,
Walter Rodney, not Walter Rodney, Marcus Mosiah Garvey. If we, when we talk about groups like the all groups the League of Revolutionary Black Workers and the Black Panther Party. The Panthers actually had women in the leadership, but I don't think any other Black Power movement had women in the leadership as much as the Garvey movement. I don't think he gets credit for that. I my study of Garvey shows that he's always had women, in the leadership and women scholars and so on and so forth. This is the last question.
I hear what you're saying, but when you read the work of these women, you'll be amazed by what they said, what they did, how they stuck when the men were dropping one down because of the pressures.
Right.
It's just remarkable, and it deserves to be better known. But you're right, the constitution of the UNIA and the role of women was far in advance of any other political organization of the time 100 years ago.
The last question, which we had more time to deal with this, but the whole question of Marxism, there is a trend of African people, I guess worldwide, but particularly in North America, that are basically saying that Marxism is irrelevant and that we don't need to have allies. There's FBA, Fundamental Black Americans, B1s, Black First. We have no relationship with other groups, and that Marxism, Leninism is absolutely irrelevant to African people. Could you address that?
Well, I would look at it the way Walter does in decolonial Marxism, because what he does is to indicate that in tackling Marxism, you have to do its reinterpretation from the standpoint of the struggle for decolonization. So there are some theoretical issues that have to be dealt with in the way one uses Marxism to understand the development of capitalism. And that itself has to come before you begin speaking about alliances and so on. But the question is, alliances around what? But I do think you need alliances. I do think that Africa and African people, whilst we can develop our own autonomous institutions, the political struggle requires relations, negotiating relations with other groups of people, and developing common cause in order to strengthen our own autonomous movements. And Walter pays some attention to that issue when he is dealing with white Marxists, pointing to them the importance of autonomy and they working in their community and us working in our communities and making relationships on the basis of autonomous efforts. Now, all of these ideas depend on particular circumstances, but they also depend on mutual respect, an agenda which one agrees on, and constant negotiations between the different groupings. But it's not possible to adequately discuss this without having concrete context. You know,
right.
You can go so far on the abstract level, but you have to have a real situation that in which you are discussing these issues.
Right. So we talked about the Marxist missionaries, and Walter talked about. I can't remember, but I remember remembering him talking about Marxist missionaries and Jamil Al-Amin. This is the last thing I say is H. Rap Brown had always used to say, "I have a bit of advice for the left. That advice, don't get left."
Yes. That's extremely good advice.
And, is there anything you like to add, sir?
What's that?
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, thanks for remembering Walter Rodney 45 years after, because one of the big problems that black people we face is that of the silencing of the ancestors and how important their voices for the world we are in, which is a very complicated and very difficult world in which we live and struggle.
And like Harold Cruz, who was Walter Rodney and Harold Cruz, I understand they used to have battles at the Ann Arbor, Michigan, but Harold Cruz talked about historical discontinuity. I think he was right on that issue.
Absolutely right on that. And that's what the Caribbean faces now, the discontinuity. I'm having discussions with some younger people on Walter Rodney this week. And there's an interest among young people, but it tends to be young people, young Jamaicans who have had a U.S. exposure. And that U.S. exposure creates a greater interest in Walter because the past 2 generations have been locked into Caribbean neoliberal ideas and thinking. And the legacies of Walter, in that context, those legacies have been submerged.
Yeah, I was blessed to have met Dr. Walter and his wife. And like I told you before, when I saw his son, Shaka, he was still in diapers. That's how far back I go with...
well, don't mention that Shaka is a big man with children and family and everything. So you would want that to be where you remember him.
Shaka's in Barbados still?
Yes, I guess he's in Barbados still. Mm-hmm.
All right, and thank you for all the information, and definitely we'll bring you back very soon, sir. Very soon.
Yes. Okay.
All right.
Bye bye.
And we are getting ready to go to the Jazz Zone with TN.